Fawkes. The year was 1605, and the first chill settled on London of the coming winter upon a clear night, where the stars seemed more pristine than the previous nights. From the streets outside, a warm glow came from a tavern in the city, where merry men could be heard, their drunkenness almost a choir of festivity. In this tavern, there was a table not like the rest. 5 men sat solemn, looking like a dull note in the ambience of the warm pub, where men, after a long day's labour, forgot their woes and their lives, for tonight at least. "Why do we insist on coming here?" said Thomas Wintour, glancing at the other 4 faces that looked into their beers. "Because it is the only place that will allow us," said his best friend, Robert Gatsby. "Oh, I don't know, Robert. What is the man on the street to know about our religious inclinations? If we're to wander into any pub and spend our hard-earned money is money after all. And despite, the beer is wicked here. For sure it's watered down. When was they last inspected?" said Wintour, lifting his pint and looking at it suspiciously. It looked pallid, even in this darkened corner. "Perhaps it's merely an inclination for you, Thomas, but I am devout." "Oh, you know what I mean," said Winter, grimacing as the pale beer hit his lips. "And I do think you should think twice about your cavalier approach to the pubs and places you frequent, good sir. Have you not heard the King's last address?" said Catesby. "What has that villain said now?" said John Wright across the table, moving to the edge of his seat. Catesby looked around. He observed the drunken laughs of the men who had their arms around ladies of the night, and sneered at all the sin. "John, it might best serve you to talk a little more conservatively, my friend. Though you are a master swordsman, you alone cannot defeat our enemy. And from what I have heard from our good friend Thomas Percy here, defeated he must be, if we are to go on. Tell them, Thomas." The 5 men leant in a little closer. To any weary visitor seeking refuge on this night, from the bitter wind that made its way through the streets of London, they would have made a conspicuous sight, when compared to the merriment around them. "It is true. It would seem our time is up. A cousin of mine who holds near counsel with the king heard his words this very day. I cannot narrate the speech by word, but, to put it simply, there will be no life for us as citizens of this nation," said Percy. "Whatever do you mean?" said Wright. "Our rights, my good friend. What makes life worth living? We won't be able to own property. We won't be able to leave wills." "Good gracious! What?" said Wintour, slamming down his beer, spilling some that he wouldn't miss. "We won't even be able to marry," said Wintour, looking down, knowing this would tip his company over the edge. "This is an outrage," said Wright. "Gentlemen," said Catesby, looking around. The sinful joy at the bar had subsided in noise, and he looked into a couple pair of eyes at the bar that took long slurps on their beer and looked at their covenant. "Yes, let us keep our heads. I am as outraged as you, but our emotions will get us nowhere," said Wright. At the end of the table was a man yet to speak. He sat with his legs crossed, his demeanour much more calmer than his religious brethren, as he took a long draw on his pipe and blew the smoke into their corner, making it even more conspicuous. "Well, it's obvious, isn't it? We must kill the king." "Fawkes! said Gatsby, in a rare display of outward rage. He glanced towards the bar, and saw one red-faced man, about 40, who he had seen drinking more than his fair share of beer, walk towards their table. "Is everything okay round here, fellas?" he said, his eyes closing in with a hard focus, as his beer came up to his lips. "Absolutely, sir. Sorry if we were to disturb you from your trivial pursuits this evening. It's just we were discussing matters of the..." is how far Catesby got before he was interrupted. "Trivial pursuits? What's that supposed to mean?" Suddenly Fawkes got up, He was quick as a cat, like time had skipped a beat, with his arm around the drunkard. "Ignore, my good friend, sir. Here, it would seem your beer is almost up. Have another one on me," said Fawkes, and as like magic, a coin was somehow between his two fingers, right in front of the man's eyes. That slowly focused in. He took the coin and looked at the men on the table with a grimace. "I'm on to you lot," he said, stumbling back to the bar, pulling up at his trousers that looked dangerously close to falling down. "That's it. Fly away, little magpie," said Fawkes, with a grin, returning to the table. "Guy," said Catesby, shaking his head, but unable to hide his smile. "Take a seat, my good friend, and tell me more about this plan of yours." Two. A speck of snow dropped upon the back of Guy Fawkes' neck, and as he felt the chill down his spine, he looked at the heavens. He had never known it to snow so early. He listened to the babble of voices around him. He stood in a London market, the sounds of Englishmen bartering and bellowing for a finer price for fine items that come from distant lands. Wines, spices, teas, coffees, cotton and such. The people they bartered with smiled and added to the rich tapestry of the metropolis. But Guy had no concern for such finery. He was looking for something of a much more destructive manner, and he knew just the guy to go to. He had never spoken to the man, but he had overheard him many a time as he passed through the market, and what had pricked his attention was the accent of the man, one he was well accustomed to from the time he had spent in Spain. He watched an elderly gentleman with a grey beard and a walking stick sell some of his produce to a man, and then he approached. "Ah, senor, you have come for some sherry, a fine drink, or what you English call sack," said the man with that accent. His voice took Guy back to a time when his life felt truly alive, and he could feel that energy now spilling back into him. "Senor, would you care to speak to me in your own language?" said Fawkes. Watching the elderly gentleman's eyes wince, Fawkes switched to that Spanish dialect, and the eyes of the man lit up. The brown in them became brilliant, the change being comparable to that of an old oak being varnished in front of his eyes. "Senor, you speak with such fluidity. How?" said the man in his native tongue. Even though they were speaking in that Spanish dialect, Fawkes looked over his shoulder. "See, for I fought with our Catholic brethren on your shores, and senor, I fight now, and for that reason I would like to keep our meeting as inconspicuous as possible, and to make our acquaintance seem as trivial as possible," said Fawkes, laughing out loud and pointing at the goods on his stall to maintain the illusion of a mere buyer. "I know of the land you are from, and I know of the gunpowder. I know it well. I need barrels of it. Barrels, good sir. For you see we have an enemy of the highest problem, one who wishes to challenge our faith. If you want no part of this, senor, then please shake your head and I will depart. But if you wish to carry on the Catholic crusade and play your part in the salvation of this nation, then please put your hand upon my shoulder and laugh with heart." Guy couldn't help but look around. He tried to maintain a still composure, a mere man that might be speaking about the exorbitant price of the sack and its quality. But he felt as though 1,000 eyes of the market were upon him. He watched the old man's eyes dullen, and now he felt like he was watching that of wood decompose. As the brightness in them completely faded to nothingness, he then heard, "We have a deal yet," exclaimed the old Spaniard, landing his rough palm on Fawkes' shoulder. "Senor, you are doing the Lord's work, and you will find a special place in heaven." "You know of the powder I speak?" said Fawkes. "I am quite certain." "Why me, senor?" "I couldn't ask anyone in England, could I?" said Fawkes. "No, obviously not." "You were paid quite handsomely," said Guy Fawkes. "For me, senor, it would come at no cost. But I do not have that power," said the old man. "It is fine, sir, I understand. We have procured a place of storage." "Can you get us 40 barrels?" said Fawkes. 40? What do you intend to do?" said the elderly man, and like the circle of life, his eyes came back to life. "To save a nation," said Fawkes. The man's jaw dropped, and he felt close to stumbling as he rested himself on his stall. It was now Guy's turn to rest his hand on the man's shoulder. The old man said, "Give me some money." "What?" said Guy. "For the sherry." The man's Mediterranean golden skin had turned English pale. His hand shook as he handed Fawkes the drink. "In 2 weeks' time, your shipment will be here," said the man, looking as though he was going to be sick. 2 weeks? Are you sure?" said Guy. "I know who to talk to. You have our full support. Now go. I will be here in 2 weeks today. Bring means of transport for the barrels. And bring money." Guy Fawkes gave the man a knowing nod and walked away, feeling cold as the snow began to come down harder. As he headed to the tavern, he knew his brothers in arms would be. Three. Beneath the grandeur and the bright-lit hall of Parliament, underground, in the near dark, 2 men whispered. "How does it look, Fawkes?" said Thomas Percy. He could barely be seen, only partially illuminated by the candlelight that Fawkes held. Though, from the slight wobble in his voice, he could tell he was nervous as himself. "I think it's fine. It's fine this time," said Fawkes. "Good. You see, I had so much trouble finding that money again. I hope I didn't arouse any suspicion. The first time we bought it, that was pretty much all my expenses, and you see..." "Thomas, stop. You were not to control the weather. You, nor me, was to expect it to be so damp so early in the year. We may have come close to vexing 3 governments, but tonight we will finish one and pave the way for our religious revolution," said Fawkes. Percy looked at his face in the candlelight and envied his cool demeanour that always seemed in control. "Guy," said Percy, "you was always destined for this. Of all the men I have ever met, it was always going to be you. From the moment I met you, "Thomas," interrupted Fawkes. "Go get on the boat. I will meet you there, on our way to Flanders, and we can discuss all this as we watch the inferno," said Fawkes. Thomas Percy smiled, and Guy didn't notice the tear that fell from his eye. He turned on his heels and left into the night. Fawkes sat on a barrel and waited for another 10 minutes, imagining the scene above him. Surely now they was in the height of their session. Wealthy, powerful men, smug and joyous, comforted by their self-proclaimed brilliance. He felt a heat rise upon him, considering what they were attempting to do to him and his brothers and sisters to make them less human. He then heard the door to the underground dwelling open, and he turned cold. "Who's in there? Who goes there?" Fawkes slowly put the candle on the floor and held his hands up as they entered the room. "We're here by order of the king. Who are you?" "The name is Johnson," said Fawkes, closing his eyes and lowering his head. He began to hear them laugh. Johnson? Yeah, right. And I'm bloody William Shakespeare." It was then the 3 guardsmen looked around and noticed their surroundings. "Here, what's in all these barrels?" Guy just kept his eyes closed, but from the look on his face, the guards knew they had found what they had come for. "Get on the floor. Empty your pockets now." Fawkes followed commands, and one of the men reached into his pocket and drew out the matches.
I don't bloody believe it. They were right.
The last thing Fawkes saw was black leather of a boot.
This is him, Your Highness,
heard Fawkes. The words were slow. He tried to move his hands, but couldn't. He was tied down, his back on a table, and he looked at the ceiling. So, they was right. Fawkes' vision came into focus. He could hear the crackle of a fire behind his head. Then above him came a face into his eye line, looking down at him with a sneer. So, you wish to kill your king, he said. Fawkes breathed deeply and glared at the man.
You would forsaken the people of this nation? Take away their parliament? Have you no mercy?
Said the king.
A dangerous disease requires a desperate remedy,
said Fawkes, spitting in the king's face. The king screamed and fell back, coming close to the fire that roared, and his guards looked at him as he slowly touched his face with the flames behind him.
Take him to the tower. Get the names of every man that bore witness to this evil. I will make you famous. They will know your name for 1,000 years. I want every name that did this. Break every bone in his body. Tear off his flesh. Rip out his tongue. Put every name. You hear me? Yes, Your Majesty, said the guards, cutting the rope loose and dragging Fawkes out the room. For a month, Fawkes' screams could be heard, coming from the Tower of London, heard in the streets below, in an increasingly cold London town. Several weeks later, he looked up at a noose. The hangman helped his broken body upon the ladders. At the highest point, he reached for the noose, then looked out at the crowd that watched. He took just a moment. Then with all his might, he leapt out, head first, fell past the scaffolding and landed head first on the stone ground. And a boo bellowed from the crowd. Don't worry, we'll still quarter the fiend anyway. You'll get your blood,
said the hangman, as the crowd let out a sarcastic cheer.